1998. I'll never forget it. It was the year when those grisly murders occurred in the Arklay Mountains. Soon after, the news was out to the whole world, revealing that it was the fault of a secret viral experiment conducted by the international pharmaceutical enterprise, Umbrella. 6 years have passed since that horrendous incident.
Leon. Long time no see.
Ada.
That's a large thing you have there.
Women.
He's just showing love for the game. And I'm the same. Because it is Valentine's Day. Yeah! 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 Yeah. Yeah. With that said, hello and kumusta? This is the Artsi and I'll tell you about how
Resident Evil
4 changed the franchise forever. For those who haven't played Resident Evil 4 or even the other games in the franchise, what is wrong with you? You should play these games right now, because Resident Evil is not just my favorite game in all of video gaming, but I guarantee it's one of the most fun games I have ever played ever since I was a dumb little kid. But enough of that. This video is not supposed to be a rant of how great the franchise is, but to explain how a single game in the franchise changed the whole franchise forever. And it is still evident to this day. And that game is the most popular game in all of the franchise. It's in the title, but I'll still say it anyway. It is
Resident Evil
4. Let's go with a little bit of history in the Resident Evil franchise. Before Resident Evil 4, there was the old school type of gameplay within the franchise.
Resident Evil.
When Resident Evil the OG came out in 1996, it took the gaming world by storm. The gameplay, graphics, and atmosphere back then was so unique, and it was a breath of fresh air for the survival horror genre. Now, of course, it's not the first of its kind. Before Resident Evil, there was Alone in the Dark, which was released in 1992, and as you can see some similar gameplay between the two. The only difference was the story, art style, and punching and kicking the enemies to death. And we all know that's ridiculous, right? Right? But let's go even further than this. Sure, Resident Evil got some inspiration from Alone in the Dark, but Resident Evil's core gameplay got it from the 1989 family computer game Sweet Home, made by Tokuro Fujiwara, who has also made some other popular games you might have known, like Bionic Commando. What about Ghosts and Goblins? My favorite game he made was the Tomba games. If you like to hit pigs, this game is for you. That sounded kinda wrong. Well, anyway, let's get back to the main point. If some of you played Sweet Home, I salute you, old-timers, because I've never played this game. But I've seen some of the gameplay, and while it is still an RPG game where the fight gameplays are turn-based, on the other hand, the other mechanics of the game like the backtracking, puzzle solving, horror, survival, and even the item management, it's all there. Just think of Sweet Home as a fantasy Resident Evil. And if anyone's watching this, that sounds freaking awesome. But other than that, we should thank Tokuro Fujiwara-san for inspiring Shinji Mikami-san and Fujiwara-san himself for making Resident Evil, and that being led to another Resident Evil game taking the gaming community by storm, and that's Shinji Mikami's masterpiece, Resident Evil 4. With all that said, Resident Evil 4 has many trials and errors, and one of those even led to the creation for the hack and slash Devil Hunter game, the Devil May Cry series. But Shinji Mikami wanted to evolve the game, but at the same time, also not departing much away from the formula. The old school Resident Evil games were fun, but also getting too stale and repetitive back then. It needed another take for the formula, and what they added was the action genre, though it was just a sprinkle of it, and the result of that was Resident Evil Nemesis and Code Veronica. Now, despite Nemesis and Code Veronica being great games, it was still missing something. The action didn't quite mix well into the horror. And so he came up with a simple but effective solution. He made the camera from this to this, the third person over the shoulder camera perspective. Wow, that's a mouthful. Resident Evil 4 came out in 2005 for the PlayStation 2, and to this day it still holds up as one of the best games of all time. It not just increased the quality for other survival horror games out there, but it's also the first third-person over-the-shoulder perspective game that was ever released, and how it affected future games because of it. For example, The Last of Us, the newer God of War games, the Mass Effect series, Gears of War. Now how about some horror games? Alan Wake, Dead Space, Evil Within, though this game was created by the same game director for Resident Evil 4, Shinji Mikami-san, and also the franchise's rival, Silent Hill 2, the remake. Of course, there are some people who doesn't like this camera angle, which I understand. It blocks a large portion of the game. But the reason why they did this is because it makes you feel more connected with the character of the game, and to feel the atmosphere of the game, especially in horror games. And hey, it worked. You could argue with other types of angles like first person or just top-down angle, but compared to Shinji Mikami's camera angle, it's just too different. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. Resident Evil 4 impacted the future of gaming back then, and it is still being used to this day. Now, despite the revolutionary camera perspective that was created here, it is just a small fraction on why it changed the franchise. The real perpetrator, in my opinion, is the survival horror action. Heavy emphasis on the action. Now don't get me wrong, the action part was a great addition to this game. Shinji Mikami mixed action into the horror game genre, but just somehow made it work. And it turned out great, and history proves it. But it cannot be said the same with the future games of Resident Evil. While I love the games that released after the fourth main title, it cannot be said the same with other people. So much as in fact they might have hated the direction the franchise was heading to. Even though it was pretty fun, but I understand why they weren't too happy with it. It was slowly turning away from the survival horror to just a horror action, but more like 90% action and 10% on the horror. Maybe even less. Let's inspect Resident Evil 5. Compared to its predecessor, it was kinda lackluster. Most of the enemies were just a copy-paste, then just redesigned from the previous game. There were some cool ones, but I can only count them with one hand. Maybe two fingers, I don't know. And like I've said, the gameplay even was more action than survival horror. Capcom never really understood the assignment, so they just copied Shinji Mikami's work, changed some few words to look original, and just said to the fans, "This is better than RE4. Trust me." I don't know, but that's what it felt to me. This game was supposed to be the conclusion for Resident Evil's first and beloved antagonist, Albert Wesker. But what we got was kinda disappointing. And it's not the ending that I was satisfied with. And I'm pretty sure some of the fans agree with me. More than a decade, fans have been eagerly waiting for this epic conclusion for Chris, Jill, and Albert's story, only to find out that Capcom decided to exclude Jill from most of the storyline and replace her with another female lead. I like her, but I would have loved to be Jill and Chris who shot the final RPG to Wesker's face. And speaking of Wesker, his final form was so lackluster. Like, really? That's it? That's the form we've been waiting for all these years? A dozen of tentacles or worms? It was just lazy design, and they know it. Need I say about Resident Evil 6? That one was just pure action. Even saying there was horror in the game was laughable at best. As I've said, I still love RE5 and RE6, but can we all agree this isn't what Resident Evil is supposed to be? And don't get me started with Umbrella Corps or whatever. But here's the kicker though. Even though the following years Resident Evil was semi-lackluster, it doesn't mean it won't get back up, and the game that turned it all around was Resident Evil 7. The start of Ethan Winter's story. Capcom learned from their mistake, and finally understanding the assignment. We should thank Koshi Nakanishi-san and his team for this. Resident Evil 7 has that level of horror that the fans were eagerly waiting for, and it put Resident Evil back on the radar. But you could see some influence from Resident Evil 4 in this game, but not that much. But the next game that Capcom released has both influence from Resident Evil 4 and 7, and that's the Resident Evil 2, the remake. The camera, the dialogue, puzzle solving, the over-the-topness of the game, gameplay, atmosphere, everything. Resident Evil just keeps evolving every time they release a game. And finally, the game that has the most influence from the Resident Evil 4 formula was Resident Evil 8, The Village. Now this game really was like a spiritual successor from Shinji Mikami's work. We got again the quippy dialogues, the over-the-top cartoony villains, some vampire, werewolf, and some robot enemies. And instead of Leon, we got Chris Redfield being a badass after for so long. And finally, Capcom finally understood Shinji Mikami's work after for so long, mixing the action into the horror genre and making it work. This game finally blended the two genres and it tasted delicious. Now, need I say about Resident Evil 4 Remake? I hope my cooking was to your satisfaction. And we should thank Shinji Mikami-san for making us one of the best games that was ever made in video gaming history. And if you like or love the video, please leave a like. And if you want to know more about this little blue YouTuber, subscribe to my channel and click on that notification bell for more updates. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video. Oh, by the way, here's a Resident Evil for you. Did you see what I did there? Did you see?
No thanks, bro.
Did you like the video? Well, if you did, how about liking the video? On top of that, you should subscribe too. Ah, by the way, if you want more videos made by me, click here on the screen. Come on, just click it. It won't hurt ya. You won't? Okay then, fine. See you later, I guess.